Dobar dan, još jednom stižemo i do završnog, zaključnog panela današnjeg događaja. To je panel Dijalogom do razvoja, međunarodna podrška u izgradnji otpornih zajednica u Srbiji. Značaj dijaloga prepoznaju brojni međunarodni partneri koji podržavaju aktivnosti i javnog i civilnog sektora vezane za razvoj lokalnih zajednica u Srbiji. U završnoj sesiji ćemo imati priliku da čujemo na koje sve načine međunarodna zajednica može da podrži dalje napore na uspostavljanju dijaloga i izgradnji otpornih zajednica u Srbiji. Danas su sa nama Shelley Pinchotti, v.d. direktora Američke agencije za međunarodni razvoj u Srbiji, Ingve Engström, šef sektora za saradnju delegacije Evropske unije u Srbiji, Saša Miller, šefica sektora za upravu, Švajcarska kancelarija za saradnju u Srbiji i Ula Anderson, šef razvojne saradnje, ambasada Kraljevine Švedske u Srbiji. Pozdravit ćemo naše goste. Hello and welcome. Thank you for taking the time to participate in this discussion. At the very start, Ms. Pinchotti, USAID has been present in Serbia for over a decade, supporting civil society and overall development. In terms of the well-being of the civil society sector, what should we focus on if we want to build an inclusive and resilient communities?
Great, thank you, everyone. It's been a really good event thus far, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. It's a very important initiative, and I'm glad the topic of dialogue with civil society and resiliency is coming back to the forefront again. This year is actually USAID's 20th anniversary of supporting the country in its democratic development. And Serbia and its civil society sector have changed, matured, and made huge steps in its own development those last 2 decades. So above all, I don't want to lose sight of that. But we do find ourselves today at a crossroad in terms of the environment for civil society. As many of you know, US views civil society as one of the most fundamental and important aspects of democracy. From the earliest days in the United States, and even before we became independent, a culture in the U.S. had developed even at the lowest levels of the town, where citizens would self-organize to solve their problems and address local authorities about issues in their communities. So it's in our blood, it's ingrained in how we see the world. Therefore, when we look at democratic development, we view this civil society engagement as essential for a healthy, functioning, democratic country. We see that in places around the world where constructive cooperation and dialogue is happening between the government and non-governmental sector, those are places where citizens are reaching higher levels of prosperity. And when USAID talks about the non-governmental sector, I want to be clear that we're talking about a very broad view. So it's civil society organizations as we know them, but it's also associations, it's private businesses, private media, non-government assisted trade unions. So we look at it at a very holistic level. But let's talk a little bit more about long-term civil society resiliency. Many of you know that every year we have this global index of civil society sustainability, where we measure civil society organizations in each country on a number of differing factors like legal enabling environment, organizational capacity, financial sustainability, infrastructure, service provision, advocacy, and public image. And we've mentioned a few times before in different forums, but the Serbian civil society has seen a lot of backsliding scores in the past few years, especially in the legal enabling environment, advocacy, and public image. While much has been said about the overall country context here, for which we really remain very concerned, I do want to focus on what civil society can do to look a little bit more internally and understand kind of within itself, within the sector, what could be done differently or better. So I would say that civil society, as we view it here, a lot of times is too reactive rather than being proactive. It's important to focus on developing real and broader constituencies of citizens who stand behind their actions, rather than always talking to people with whom they always agree. And civil society should be testing and employing creative approaches, working towards long-term goals and visions that they've set for themselves. I should say we as donors need to do this too. However, we're government and we're expected to be slow and always behind the curve. Civil society as private actors should be leading and at the forefront of changes.
We saw elements of this in the COVID response, with volunteers cropping up all over their local communities, civil society organizations leading in response to helping vulnerable people, and organizations, businesses finding new experimental ways to develop medical technology like ventilators, hand sanitizer, masks. It was impressive, and really citizens saw heroic actors in their midst, in their communities. So now it's time to really sustain that energy and move forward with advocacy efforts. Resiliency of democratic actors like civil society rests on their ability to be flexible, to recover, to adapt, and to innovate. And look at us right now, actually. This is a perfect example again. We're all attending online conferences with complex production that were not common before the pandemic. But now we've all gained new skills. We're partnering with IT companies like never before and production sectors. And it's made it really possible for us to adapt and at an unprecedented change. While this is great, we don't want to wait again for circumstances to change before trying new things and new approaches. So I would encourage civil society to be on the leading edge and on the cusp of those changes. But back to your question about what we need to do specifically to build resilient communities, I would again say that all of us, and I'm including donors in this, should move out of our comfort zones, meet people outside of our bubbles, and really listen to their perspectives, broaden circles. I wanted to highlight just one recent kind of advocacy success that's been going on in the United States that I think is a great example of broad-based constituency building, and that's the criminal justice reform movement. It's been something that I've been following personally for a long time, over a decade, and at the time when it was pretty nascent, it was a group of mothers who got together because their children had been put into jail and given long sentences for a very low-level drug crime. But now today, you see that Kim Kardashian is kind of leading the charge. But Kim Kardashian is at the end result of advocacy that has been building broader and broader people along the way. It's got religious communities involved. It has the most liberal of civil liberty reformists involved. It has Democrats, it has Republicans, but all people that saw this issue of equality and fairness as kind of the driving force. And they were able to bring a lot of different people along the way. And so I just use that as a most recent example of something that that maybe would have been seen just in kind of leftist circles as something about civil liberties, but it's actually managed to have a broad spectrum of support and only now has culminated in kind of national level changes. But they started small and they started looking at how they can gain followers. So I just want to say again, you should arm yourself with knowledge and expertise from around the world to safeguard and improve democratic institutions, policies and mechanisms that Serbia has fought for a long time and hard to establish, and everyone needs to start looking ahead of the curve instead of behind. In USAID, we support you to build this resiliency of the civil society sector because we know that this is a crucial component of reestablishing constructive cooperation with public institutions. And I hope this event is just one of many that will bring us closer to that. Thank you.
Thank you. We hope so too. Mr. Engstrom, EU is the largest donor for supporting the engagement of civil society in the overall reform process as part of Serbia's EU accession. What do you think needs to be changed or improved to maximize CSO's contribution in this regard? What are some areas where civil society should be particularly engaged in going forward?
Thank you very much, and welcome to everyone as well from my side, people listening, and colleagues around the panel here. So, just connecting back to the previous session, also with Minister Chomic, I would like to see how the government is working on these issues when it comes to dialogue. This dialogue is crucial, and it's a dialogue that would be needed across the board with all ministries involved in policy, with the different policymakers in the society. But it's also important to have one interlocutor at high level where we can have a dialogue on improvement of the environment for civil society, and I hope we can establish that with the new minister now. So why is this important first? Civil society, just referring back to Shanley as well, it's a crucial factor of any democratic society. So democracy is based on having views and thoughts and people being able to raise their voices, and that policies are done according to the best needs and the best information that is available. So it doesn't mean that civil society's ideas, individual ideas, always have to be listened to. Well, they have to be listened to, but maybe they cannot be followed in all cases. But everybody needs their voice, and for that reason, it's important that the government also likes this idea that state appreciate, maybe not always to have everyone liking what they're doing, but having critical voices and constructive voices from the people affected by the policies. So this is in essence part of a democratic society. So we are working in two ways. One is to monitor and giving guidance. We have a guidelines and a matrix also on following what the environment for civil society, and there are a few things still in the Serbian context that we believe could be improved when it comes to the fair delivery of support to civil society, that are equal conditions, and there are also good conditions to help civil society to be financed and to have a good opportunity to act. And this concerns also the ability for private sector to sponsor civil society. There are many different types of civil society, and some are more service-driven. There could be private interest to help them, but then the donations from private sector also need to be possible to do in a good way according to the taxation system and so on. On the other hand, we also work with civil society, so yes, you might see us as a donor. I would think that is the most important part, but I think it's important from all development partners and the government to help to build capacities of civil society, because civil society needs good ground to stand on, but there also have to be a constructive approach, proactive and based also on citizens' needs. So we are, and this is required in all sectors across, and I think it's more a matter of distinguishing a little bit on civil society dealing with more service delivery, helping people in the society, and those who are monitoring and holding state actors responsible for following laws and policies. We are trying to do this in different ways. We have our support through calls of proposals. That's the way we have to work. But we are particularly keen on reaching out to the local level, because that's where the democracy needs to start. There has to be an interest from people, there has to be an issue to address, and we might have views on things that are important for the accession process, but it's also a matter of democracy building, and that the people should have the ability to raise issues when it could come to environmental issues, pollution, which we unfortunately suffer sometimes in the winter here. But it can also be issues of rule of law or kind of access to justice. It could be disabled people or people of minority situations, vulnerable groups. So the spectrum is very large, but the question is the possibilities on raising issues, and have the rights to raise the issues, to have the financial means to raise the issues, and the capacities to do it in a good way. And another tool that we are trying, and we hope that we'll contract very soon, is to create a hub for dialogue. And by that we mean a hub that can develop issues which are crucial for civil society at a horizontal level, but also could have smaller financing opportunities for organizations who need to travel once this is possible again, to write papers or to do small research. So we're working on different issues, so I hope we can contribute to this and to ensure that the civil society is heard and have the opportunities to work in Serbia in a good way. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Miller, the Swiss-supported active civil society project is focused on dialogue, citizens' participation in decision-making and building partnerships between citizens, civil society and local public authorities. Why is partnership important for community development? What should be the starting point in reaffirming and improving cooperation between citizens, CSOs and public authorities?
Dear colleagues, let me start with welcoming this excellent initiative to reopen dialogue on improving the cooperation between the government and civil society. As we all know, civil society has a critical role in promoting democracy, human rights, accountability and inclusive societies. In our view, having a constructive and open dialogue between civil society and the government is a precondition for a functioning democracy. In my country, Switzerland, civil society activism is deeply anchored in the society and it actively contributes to the public debate. And even if civil society sometimes raises issues which are uncomfortable, in the end we feel they still contribute to a better society. During the COVID pandemic, we saw that civil society played an important complementary role to the government's response and was able to use its strong links to local communities and experience in working with excluded groups to target their help to those most in need. Without them, the lives of people may have been endangered. As Switzerland, we supported several Serbian NGOs who provided humanitarian assistance and counseling services to vulnerable groups during the pandemic. So with all the challenges it poses, we see the COVID pandemic as an opportunity to foster closer cooperation and better coordination between civil society and the government. Now, shifting to the topic of partnerships, which you particularly asked about. For us, partnership means that civil society and governments work together, hand in hand, in the best interest of citizens. We see several entry points for government and civil society to cooperate, particularly at the local level, where citizens are closest to the government and where Switzerland traditionally has a strong engagement. So what are these entry points? One entry point is certainly that civil society can bring additional expertise and knowledge to local policy making, as they are often active in specific thematic fields and have sort of practical experience that they can share. For instance, in the area of gender-based violence or care for Romas. They can also provide specialized new services for vulnerable communities which may not yet be available at the local level. And they can mobilize citizens to more actively engage in local affairs, for instance in public hearings, and make sure that the voices of marginalized communities who may have less interactions with local governments normally are heard by local decision makers. Through our programs, including the ACT program that you referred to, we support partnerships between local governments and civil society along these lines. Our experience has taught us that these partnerships, for them to work, there needs to be a clear will, commitment and openness on the side of the government, but at the same time also a constructiveness on the side of the civil society in how they engage. Democracy and the active participation of citizens in public decision-making are issues that are close to our heart. In the last years, Serbia has passed several laws that make consultations with citizens and civil society mandatory. This is a positive development. Yet we notice that participation is not yet routinely practiced by the government, and we also see a certain level of apathy on the side of citizens. So to address this gap, we directly support local governments in setting up processes and institutionalizing sort of meaningful participation processes, and at the same time working with civil society organizations to create a demand for citizen involvement, to better network themselves for joint action, and to also better represent the real needs of the people they actually represent. So also that they are not sort of seen as what often happened as sort of actors that try to serve the donors' needs, but really bring them back to represent the people that they should represent. We are also supporting the national parliament and local assemblies in the organization of public hearings and consultations with civil society organizations, for instance, in the important field of combating corruption. There are some positive examples like consultations on the budget in the city of Užice, partnerships on inclusive programs for persons with disabilities in Smederevo and Vlasotice, or cooperation between the civil sector and authorities on active labor measures for the most vulnerable groups and the enhancement of the local employment action plan in Kragujevac. Once again, we very much appreciate the initiative of the ministry to have the kind of dialogue that we had today, and hope this will serve as a positive example and also as a role model also for other ministries to more actively engage in dialogue and partnership with civil society in their specific sectors. Switzerland stays, of course, committed to support the government and civil society on that journey. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson, the Swedish International Development Agency programs look to build an open and efficient public administration that guarantees human rights and provides good service to the citizens. What should be the key values incorporated in future relations between civil society and public authorities, especially as related to service provision?
Hello everyone, and I would like to start by saying thank you for inviting me to this important and very interesting event. I would like to thank the Minister for her presentation and all the other partners who have provided their important input to this topic. From the Swedish side, we've been engaged here for almost 20 years. The main target of the Swedish development cooperation is to help Serbia in its effort to join the European Union, and we engaged in many different areas such as gender and environment protection, which are two of the main areas where we engage. When it comes to civil society, we agree with the other partners that have been speaking here in the panel, saying that this is really a core of democracy, this social dialogue, the participation of civil society organizations, providing their thoughts, input in changes in society at all times. When it comes to values that I think are important to keep in mind here, I would say that transparency is a key value, that we stick to facts in this dialogue, and that we are as honest and open to each other as we can be. At the same time, I think, and this has also been raised by several members of this seminar earlier, the aspect of mutual respect in the dialogue is very important. Even if we disagree, that's a natural part of a democracy. People have different opinions. We will disagree. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That can be a good thing, that you have to argue what is the best solution to a problem you have in society. And then, of course, we should also keep in mind that there should be no discrimination based on gender, ethnicity, or anything else. in this dialogue, everyone should get an equal chance to participate in the dialogue in society. And then when it comes to engage in this respectful dialogue, it's important that it takes place all over the thematic board, so to say, that there might be areas that are sensitive, but maybe those areas are the areas where it's most important to try and engage in a constructive way in order to try and reach compromise instead of creating polarization, try and achieve results that feel as a win-win for everyone, from the public institutions and from the citizens, from the stakeholders with different interests. I think it will create ownership in society, both in the institutions and among the citizens, that the reforms are a topic for everyone. And of course that you are constructive in this approach and listen to what the others have to say and hear their arguments and sort of assess them also based on what you thought before you went into a meeting. And then another topic that has been touched upon is the rule of law. It's one of the key areas of the EU accession reform process in many ways. When it comes to the social dialogue, it's of course important to follow the processes for the role of CSO in society and how this dialogue is in certain ways formalized in Serbia, the same way as in Sweden and other countries. I think, however, it's important to when you apply this legislation, to keep in mind the spirit of the legislation. It's not just having a meeting so that you can tick a box. It's actually you have a meeting so that you can listen to each other and see the perspectives of others and try and take into account all these perspectives when you make important decisions on how to create improvements in society. Another thing, especially since this is about service provision to citizens, and this is also, I think, a key aspect of the discussion on rule of law in general, that the rule of law is not just about adopting laws on paper, it's about the implementation of these laws that have been decided. And I think that so that citizens feel that once there has been this social dialogue, there has been a thorough process for adopting new laws that create reforms, that citizens see that they are actually being implemented. There is a change for the better in their lives. Then I think I should also like to underline the importance, and I think my colleague Yngve underlined this as well, that this is not just for this new ministry to be engaged in. It's important that there is an engagement on this social dialogue across the board, all the ministries, but also at the local level, at the municipalities engage in a dialogue with the citizens. Sometimes the problems that need to be discussed. Am I back?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yes, okay. That they need to have local solutions, and it's important that the social dialogue take place at the right level. And my final comment is that one of the most valuable things you can have in a society is trust between the citizens and the decision makers, etc. And I think that this social dialogue is a key factor to create this trust in society between different stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Let me ask you, the other participants, if you have other comments. So how to actually, let's say, find the first step when we have such a large span of topics that should be dealt when we speak about this dialogue and improving of civil society role?
I mean, well, I think in a democracy that should come from the citizens themselves. So civil society serves as an aggregator of all different issues. So it depends on what we're hearing from citizens. I mean, if you're a civil society organization that's representing cancer patients versus a civil society organization that's representing free and fair elections, I mean, I think it begs to differ. But I think in terms of civil society resiliency, what we really need to work on, and I say we as a collective because it's also donors setting priorities as well, but I think it's one, again, I mentioned broadening constituencies, that citizens themselves have to see that civil society as a sector does represent their interests, that it's not kind of an elite group of people that are talking amongst themselves, that don't have much connection to citizens' daily lives, that are experiencing problems in their different towns and cities. And that's a broad generalization, but I think that's a good ethos to have in approaching how to delineate problems. And I think that also helps to improve the public image. That's one of the things that we've identified as a main inhibitor for civil society resiliency, that if you don't have the population seeing you as credible interlocutor with the government, then you don't have that force of them behind you in order to approach the government and say that you're truly representing this group of citizenry. And so I think that limits the ability of civil society to play that role. At the same time, I think that the government needs to recognize that civil society has a lot of expertise in different policy areas, and that the general approach to opening up policy dialogue to civil society is not one of criticism on the government. It's about trying to improve policy before it's adopted, because we've seen time and time again, you adopt policy in a vacuum that's going to affect people, and it's never been vetted by these different interest groups, and you end up with a less than ideal policy that ends up having to be relitigated in the public forum, or you end up with legal challenges. And so I think the government recognizing that you can have a better product.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is it. When we speak about technical problems, you will be able to see all the points and stands of the participants of this panel on our website. I can at the end thank all the participants in this panel for sparing the time for today's event. Thank you all very, very much. Hvala i svima vama koji ste pratili današnji događaj. Hvala što ste ovaj deo dana proveli sa nama. Rekli bismo da nije bio bilo kakav dan. Pokazali smo šta smo radili zajedno u proteklih godinu dana, slavili zajedničku borbu za zajednički cilj. Ponosni smo javnim zagovaranjem i ponosili smo se tokom ovog događaja. Promenili smo jedan Bajagin stih koji ide, a svi ćete prepoznati: jesmo li sretniji, jesmo pametniji, godine prolaze, mi stojimo, u verziju koju verujemo da odgovara sasvim onome što radimo. Bićemo sretniji, jesmo pametniji, godine prolaze, a mi radimo. Hvala još jednom svima što ste pratili današnju konferenciju. Aktivni građani, bolje društvo. Doviđenja.